Questions for Councilmember Miller? We have a lot of people who have signed up for this, so I think we can just go down the list and have them testify. And we will, I think there's several people that have come in that aren't signed up. So we'll just start and go down the list of Vicki Walton. Thank you for being here.
Mr. President Pro Tem and councilors, thank you. I would like for you to imagine that you're walking down the street and this man pulls up and he attacks you with a gun and he says, "Give me all of your money." Now, does he have to shoot you in order for you to give him the money, or is the threat enough for you to hand everything over? Less than 2 years ago, Denver City Council authorized the use of eminent domain to seize homes and businesses for private development in the historic Five Points district. The vote put 246 properties, including well-maintained Victorian homes, under threat of condemnation. The Blight Study commissioned by Denver officials included these words: "The definition of blighted area in the law is broad and encompasses not only those areas containing properties so dilapidated as to justify condemnation, but also envisions the prevention of deterioration." Well, according to those words, the old North End properties could qualify for possible blight if property can be taken because an urban renewal authority or city council envisions that area might eventually deteriorate. The Denver Blight Study consisted of a consultant taking unflattering photos, cracked sidewalks, vacant lots, oddly shaped parcels, and unfortunately, the Denver Council fell for it. Neglected but livable properties not even generating code violations triggered blight designation and eminent domain authorization for an entire neighborhood. And maybe you think that you will never be swayed, but what about the council that comes after you? City officials and private planners routinely say that eminent domain is only used as a last resort, but this is simply semantics. Filing for condemnation may be the last thing the government does, but the threat of eminent domain is so ominous that it influences all negotiations. Truly open negotiation is impossible when another party or the government has the power to take what it wants through implied threats. This leaves property owners with no weapon to fight back. They stand helpless with a figurative gun pointed at their chests. Eminent domain isn't just abused when a person loses their home or their business in court. It's abused when a home or business owner sells under the threat of condemnation. To say eminent domain wasn't used or held back is to point a gun at someone, steal their property, and say no crime has been committed because no shots were fired. Today's property right ordinance narrows the definition of blight. It prevents multiple parcels or entire neighborhoods from being designed blighted. Property rights are fundamental to people who stand for liberty. You are elected to represent the people and their rights. Please represent us now by making our property rights stronger and by voting for this ordinance. Thank you.
Good timing. That was great. Deborah Harpstart.
Well, I came ahead of Deborah, so
Oh, okay.
My name is Sherry Brenzel. Across the nation since Kelo versus New London, citizens have worked to strengthen property rights laws, but they aren't always met with open arms. Government bureaucrats and elected officials argue that the political process is enough of a check against eminent domain. Well, the political process is obviously not enough. In its report, Public Power, Private Gain, the Institute for Justice documented more than 10,000 filed or threatened condemnations for private use in a 4-year period. The democratic process at the local level did not stop these condemnations. Just last week, right here in Colorado, Senate Bill 93 almost passed. It would have given eminent domain authority to oil and gas companies. And I want to remind you all there was a massive fight in this state to take away the eminent domain right that the railroad thought it had out east. Those properties were all under a terrible situation where those property owners had to go to court to get their title cleared, and it was a huge burden on the property owner. Private electric company utilities already have the authority to declare eminent domain. Where are our state lawmakers when that was allowed? Developer promises of increased tax revenues and jobs are just too tempting for many citizens to pass up. cities to pass up, even if it means forcing citizens from their homes and businesses. Most people, especially residents of poor and minority neighborhoods, simply do not have the political or financial clout to win the battle to save their homes and businesses. In many cases, the developers have won and properties were destroyed, and guess what's been developed on the land? Nothing. 9 years later, in the Kelo case, the land still lies barren with the developers' promises unfulfilled. Increasingly across the nation, developers and corporations intent on land grabs pump money into political campaigns. Yet, as they get their people into office, it becomes even more difficult for the average Joe to protect his home and business. Today's ordinance puts another much-needed check on the political process by making it more public and transparent. Before City Council could take property, one public hearing and 2 readings would have to take place, and a supermajority of council would have to vote in favor of the taking. Does that shed more light on the council's decision? Absolutely. But when council is considering removing a fundamental right, the least it can do is work harder and be more transparent about it. We do not need to abuse the eminent domain. In a definition, eminent domain is a pretty word, but what it really boils down to is usurpation. It's to take the place of, or by, or as if by force, to seize, or exercise authority that is wrongfully given.
Okay, thank you. Deborah Harpstreit. Welcome.
A common myth is that economic development requires eminent domain. In reality, throughout the United States, economic development happens every day without eminent domain. Walt Disney constructed Disney World without condemning or threatening to condemn a single piece of property. The Rouse Company in Howard County, Maryland, created an entirely new city from scratch without eminent domain or its threat. And in Rhode Island, the Commonwealth Development assembled 21 separate parcels and built an enormous shopping center, again without eminent domain or the threat of it. Conversely, projects that use eminent domain for private development often fail to live up to their promises, and they impose tremendous costs, both personal and economic, in the form of lost communities, uprooted families, and destroyed small businesses. In addition to Kelo, there are many other examples. 30 acres of land in Mesa, Arizona still stand vacant thanks to a failed redevelopment project that began in 1992 and resulted in the city bulldozing 63 homes. In 2001, property owners in downtown Colorado Springs had to hire attorneys to protect their businesses. One property owner was quoted in a newspaper article saying, "Philosophically, it's hard for me to accept that the city can tell me there's a better use for my land than my business, even though they have no idea yet what that use will be. A baseball stadium, a convention center. Why is that business more deserving than mine? Why is that a higher use of the land than my use?" In the same article, the vice chairman of the Colorado Springs Urban Renewal Authority stated that eminent domain gives a little bit of extra authority to help the developer to know we intend to get this project done. It troubles me that property owners had to hire an attorney to protect what was theirs, and this kind of treatment continues to this day in Colorado Springs. According to minutes from a Colorado Springs Urban Renewal Authority meeting this past January, when a developer expressed displeasure about negotiations he had had with a property owner, a URA board member said, "Under the state statute, there is the power of condemnation. Condemnation, of course, is a process for using eminent domain. The remaining defenders of eminent domain abuse argue that Americans must choose between private property rights and economic growth. Fortunately, the evidence is clear and compelling. Americans can have both. Today's ordinance would help Colorado Springs property owners know the government is working with them to protect their property, not against them to take it. Please vote in favor of this ordinance."
Okay, thank you. Garrett Kuhn or Khan? Hope I'm right on that name, so thank you.
Coon, yeah, you got it just right. Mr. President, Mr. President Pro Tem, members of the council, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm wrapping up my bachelor's degree in philosophy of justice at UCCS, so I'm uniquely blessed to be able to spend my time absorbing the principles that make our quality of life in this part of the world possible. Life, liberty, and property are things which I hold uniquely close to my heart, and which are things which our heritage holds high as being things worth fighting for. When I heard that Councilmember Miller was bringing forth a municipal ordinance to help close the blight loophole in state legislation, it appeared to me as though it should be a slam dunk. After all, who in good conscience wouldn't stand behind an ordinance explicitly aimed to bulwark basic fundamental rights, explicitly the right to be secure in one's property, perhaps the most pivotal of the rights for which our founders fought. But then I learned that members of the city staff, hired and fired at the pleasure of our mayor, had in fact decided not to get behind the ordinance. And so I sought out examples of what city staff had said in opposition to the ordinance, and Councilmember Miller was accommodated my request and provided me with direct written quotes by city staff. Here's one. Prohibiting the use of eminent domain could curtail the city's ability to assemble land for city projects that will produce jobs and taxes. So the governments should be able to assemble land, meaning take our property to produce jobs and taxes. First of all, it is not the job of the government to produce jobs. It is secondly not the job of the government to find new ways to tax us. And thirdly, it is not the job of the government to take our property, but rather to keep us secure in it. Here's another doozy from a member of the city staff. The use of eminent domain coordinates public and private efforts to organize and build cohesive neighborhoods. So now I am to believe that our city government is going to work with developers to destroy one neighborhood only to then be able to build another they think will work better. I wonder whether the ambitious would-be central planner on city staff might be reminded that we live in the United States of America and not communist Korea. And here's the most unbelievable tidbit, again, not from a member of a communist regime, but a member of our own city staff. Local city officials know best in deciding whether a city project will benefit the community on a case-by-case basis and should not be limited by a restrictive ordinance. I'm sorry, but while I truly respect the elected office of City Council, I do not believe that you should get to decide on a case-by-case basis whether my neighbors and I get to keep our homes or our businesses. I believe our Constitution should do that, and where our federal Constitution and state laws have failed, we have the ability and we have the liberty as a city to do that. So respectfully, I ask you to tie your hands, restrict your reach, and make very difficult, your ability to use eminent domain, both outright or through threats. Resist the pressure to listen to the advice of those who do not value our fundamental rights. Resist the urge to say, I am for property rights, but I value property rights. However, there is no but and there is no however with this issue. Life, liberty, and property, these ever remain things worth fighting for, and I hope that you'll fight for the citizens of our city and vote for this ordinance.
Okay,
Thank you all very much.
Bill Murray.
There's some slides, try to get them, I'll give you these, pass around, we can look at them. Okay, let's see if I can.
That's my favorite view of Garden Grove. Yeah.
All right, get them.
I read them already.
All righty, I'm Bill Murray. I'd like to talk about lofty goals and environments. Instead, I'm going to talk about misuse of power and greed, which seems to be an overriding factor in a lot of these particular environments. This particular slide, it can't happen here, the Greg Knowles property saga, is my attempt to bring a face and a absolute environment to our discussions. As been mentioned previously, when the city puts a gun to your head, do you stop and ask if it's loaded? No, you don't. Now, this particular piece of property, if you can see it clearly, and you can see my pointer, see that bottom, that's West Colorado Avenue? This thing in the right-hand corner, that's the Antlers Hotel. This is the segment that used to be called the Knowles Industrial Park. Mr. Knowles now owns one piece of it, that circle right there. And that's the property in contention. All right, a brief history of the urban renewal project in this particular area. However, before I start, let me ask you something. If you're sitting at home at dinner and you get a call at 5 o'clock in the evening from a Gazette reporter who says to you, oh, by the way, the Urban Renewal Authority is condemning your property. What do you think about it? and you've never heard from them, what's your initial reaction? It can't happen here. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? I'm going to show you a trail of greed that goes across the spectrum. 2006, your resolution about the Southwest, about this particular area. In 2008, there was a new SOI, which differed considerably from the original statement, and proposed all of a sudden an arts district comprised of 26 residential live-work units by Murphy Constructors Incorporated, along with a 5,700 square foot commercial area. This gets to be critical because if you look at the date and you look at the 225-room hotel by John Q. Hammonds, you may have realized it wasn't built. So questions suddenly arise. Where did the current Railroad Lofts project come from? Since it's not been approved by the City Council, who approved it? Since it's not been approved, what action can the CSURI take? Can they take Greg Knoll's property without allowing him recourse? And the answer very specifically is yes. This is a letter from Mr. Fisher, who's Mr. Murphy's attorney, that was sent out in 2012. The result now is that the authority is ready to do whatever is necessary to get renewal going in Murphy's area. Notice the date, 2012. That seems to be a rather further date than we have been talking about. Well, it's directly related to the Conversations for City for Champions, which occurs directly south of the property we're discussing. This particular property, if resold to Mr. Murphy, will result in a direct private profit of $34 million, which you gave him through this particular process. Make it fast. This is another letter we received, as Councilman Miller has stated. This was after the fact, after Councilman Bennett approved the loft study, after Councilman Bennett voted yes on the blight study. These things have already been done.
Okay, please wrap up.
And finally, this is an example of blight study. See this picture right here? Was used, Mr. Murphy actually put that truck there to show that letter, the thing was blighted, and that was used as an example of a blighted area. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
This is City of Champions.
Anita Miller.
Hi.
Hi,
Anita
welcome.
Anita has graciously allowed me to go ahead of her. I have my son's baseball game to get to, so. My name is Kathy Smith. I'm a property owner and business owner in Colorado Springs. I was a delegate at the recent El Paso County Republican Assembly. I, with the rest of almost 1,400 delegates in attendance, had the opportunity to vote on 28 resolutions. One of those resolutions concerned the use of eminent domain. It reads, Colorado Republicans oppose governmental taking of private property for the benefit of private individuals, private entities, or for the government revenue enhancement. 97.8% of the delegates voted in favor of that resolution. It is clear that the blight definition in Colorado law is too broad. It allows a backdoor method for the taking of property that I and the other political representatives of this city are overwhelmingly against. Supporting this ordinance is supporting the will of the people. We want the definition of blight narrowed in a way that Colorado law does not currently do. We want to serve as an example to the rest of the state and the rest of the country that our government does not get to decide what to do with an individual's property. We should not have to go to court to defend what is ours, and suggesting the court process is the means by which people can fight off eminent domain threats is the same as saying that we can take a robber to court. Why do we need a law to deter a thief from stealing? The burden of proof should be on the thief and not the victim. The fact is, all over the United States, including Colorado, the government is robbing us of our property because the current law is not enough of a deterrent. I am one person, but I believe I represent the 97.8% of Republicans in our city when I ask you to strengthen our property rights with this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anita Miller. Welcome.
Thank you. I spoke before council in January about the URA meeting I attended that month. Much discussion at that meeting was about eminent domain and the use of blight studies, which in the United States and in Colorado are a first step toward eminent domain threats and unbalanced negotiations between property owners and government. At that same URA meeting, in addition to the situation Mr. Murray just discussed, another potential URA project was brought up. Westside business owners had ideas about sprucing up the area around their business. They described homes in the area as dilapidated. Several homes were specifically discussed. A business owner said of the homeowners, "These are older people who don't have the money to repair their homes, and they're just not going to be able to bring them up to speed and sell them. We can give them fair market value." The business owners spoke of the number of rentals in the area as an indication of blight, and a URA board member said it was clearly a slum and blight neighborhood. Mr. Reese of the URA said it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to be qualify for blight. For now, this project is on a back burner. The business owners didn't want to pay for the blight study themselves, as Mr. Murphy, the developer, had done in the previous case. But while I was at that meeting, I thought about the people living in those homes, people who most likely had no idea their homes were being discussed. Maybe they were home sipping coffee and watching TV, and they had no idea that they were this close to having a blight study performed on their property, and they had little more protecting their homes than three things. One, the results of the blight study, that their homes wouldn't pass. Two, this very political body. And three, a weak, loophole-riddled state law. Homeowners weren't thinking about these things because in these United States, people don't think they have to. They think it won't happen to my home. You might be thinking it won't happen here. I guarantee you, Suzette Kilo didn't think her little pink house would be taken, and neither did the thousands of property owners who've had property taken in the last several years in this country, including some in this state. I drove into that dilapidated neighborhood last week. People sat on porches, kids rode bikes, dogs were being walked. It reminded me of the neighborhood where my parents live. If my parents and the people in these homes were given fair market value, it would put them in a significantly worse situation. I also took peeks at your homes and neighborhoods. I found several blight factors: unusual lot configuration, crumbling sidewalks, unusual street layout. Some of you live on floodplains, and some of your neighbors have unmaintained landscaping and unused property. Next door to Councilman Miller's home is a rental property. Whom do you want to rely on to protect your property? Our URA? Our We Colorado Law? The next city council? The mayor? The mayor sent staff to say he opposes this property rights ordinance, and it was no surprise to me. I've seen this man on a number of occasions work in direct conflict to our U.S. Constitution. Now is your opportunity to make our city property rights stronger. Now is your opportunity to serve as an example to the rest of our state. Do something positive. Please vote in favor of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria Miller? Welcome.
Hi, I'm Maria Miller. I'm going to show you a 2-minute and 30-second video of Suzette Kilo from Kilo versus New London. Miss Kilo is addressing the Cato Institute about the government's taking of her home. Like so many people who thought this could never happen to them, it happened to her and to dozens of her friends and neighbors. Please vote yes on today's ordinance and strengthen our property rights in Colorado Springs. Thank you.
Maybe we did not live in grand manors that the Pfizer executives lived in, but our homes were well cared for, we paid our taxes, and we lived in a neighborhood that was comfortable for us. But we weren't going to be comfortable for long. For 10 long years, we fought to keep our homes. We fought the media. We fought in the media. We fought in the city council and the legislative offices. We fought in the courts. We won the support of the public, but the politicians made our lives hell. Eviction notices were posted on our doors Thanksgiving Eve. Our neighbors' homes were demolished around us. Our streets were shut down. Some of us became ill. Some of us even died. Even the air was difficult to breathe from the demolitions and the blasting around us. But we never gave up because we believed that this land was our land. until the United States Supreme Court told us and the world differently. What the Supreme Court basically said was our land was only our land until someone else could make better use of it and pay more taxes. Even though we, the plaintiffs in Kelo versus New London case, lost our personal battle, the war is still being fought. As a result of the Supreme Court's unbelievable ruling, a majority of the states have passed legislation offering more protection to American property owners. Probably everyone who has ever given a speech hopes that something he or she says will be worth remembering. And I hope you remember this. If it's true that it takes an entire village to raise a child, then we and our children are in serious trouble. Although 42 states have passed laws providing more protection against the abuse of eminent domain, there are still many places where neighborhoods are destroyed to make way for malls, hotels, and spas. And the people who suffer the most are not only the American children, but also our elderly. Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce Pierce Indians said, "The white man made us many promises, but he kept only one. He said he'd take our land, and he did." This still continues. Let us be the generation, be the one to bring this terrible abuse to an end. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Jill Davis. Welcome.
I'm Jill Davis. Back in 2003, Denver's Alameda Square was a strip of stores that wasn't modern or beautiful, but it did solid, good business. There were about 25 businesses in all, mostly locally owned and mostly serving the Asian community. They included 2 grocery stores, 2 restaurants, a hair salon, a clothing shop, a jeweler, and a baker. Together, they contributed about $125,000 a year in sales tax revenue. They also created income for many families. Then, the Denver Urban Renewal Authority came along and voted to use eminent domain to condemn all the stores. The URA wanted to give Walmart more than $10 million in tax subsidies to move into the space. More than half of the businesses left as soon as they were able. The threat of eminent domain was too much for them, and they were not up for a fight financially. And then, guess what happened? Walmart backed out. The result was that this strip mall that really hadn't needed redevelopment suddenly did. The Urban Renewal Authority came in again and got a Lowe's. It cost the URA about $19 million of public money to build the store, and the Lowe's folded 2 years later. What had been working with the original strip mall was the synergy of the stores. They worked together to fill a niche and to support families, and they did it well until government got in the way. As the CEO of the Business Chamber of Southern Colorado, I represent many businesses here in Colorado Springs. I want to be able to go back to those businesses and tell them that this council works for them, not against them. I want to tell them that the council takes their property rights seriously, and that this council will let the world know through the ordinance that Colorado Springs does not take property away, and therefore bring in more businesses to Colorado Springs. Please support businesses in our city by supporting this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Kanda Califf. Welcome.
Thank you. We at the Business Chamber of Southern Colorado support this ordinance because it is a pro-free market, pro-business ordinance. In 2006, in response to Kelo, Colorado added a component to state law that says municipalities cannot seize property for private development. You would think that would be enough to stop the use and the threat of eminent domain for economic development purposes, right? But it is not. Like many laws, this one contains a significant loophole. The law permits local officials to declare property blighted, and those same local officials can then transfer blighted property to private developers. As we've seen discussed here today, it's fairly easy to have a property declared blighted. As the Government Affairs Officer of the Business Chamber of Southern Colorado, I'm here today to speak specifically about how this loophole has affected businesses in Colorado in recent years. In Fort Collins, city council members threatened Sears when the store refused to sell to developers looking to revitalize a mall. In Longmont, city council members threatened to use eminent domain on Dillard's if the store didn't abide by a developer's terms. In the last 2 years, Denver, North Glen, and Thornton governments passed urban renewal plans that authorize the use of eminent domain to seize property for private developers. Eminent domain and the threat of eminent domain present an environment that is unconducive to doing business. How can you invest money, energy, and time into a business? How can you work to attract customers to a particular location when all the time you have to look over your shoulder, worrying that your government might allow someone else to take it under the guise of blight? Today's ordinance closes the loophole in Colorado law by narrowing the definition of blight. Supporting this ordinance says to any business considering a relocation to Colorado Springs, which is something you guys want, this city has your back. We will not allow another business to come in and take your property because they have a shiny new idea. Supporting this ordinance could make us an example to the rest of Colorado and to the rest of the country. It would show everyone that we are a community that truly values property rights, and we are willing to put that in writing. Please vote in favor of this property rights ordinance.
Thank you. Okay, that's all I have who are signed up. If you want to come and speak on this issue, would you like to just start and we'll just come forward? We'll start. Come ahead. Welcome.
Good afternoon, members of council. My name is Tim Seibert. I'm here representing the Housing and Building Association of Colorado Springs. As you know, the Housing and Building Association has a keen interest in land use legislation when it comes before this body. We monitor all regulations that come forward through zoning and land development standards, considerations that are brought forward. We had been aware that there was discussion about this ordinance coming forward, but we were provided off the website this ordinance yesterday. We appreciate the decision and the discussion about having a transparent process when considering eminent domain. We ask that as a stakeholder in land use issues, we be provided an opportunity to be participants in this process in a transparent way also. Given all the examples that have been presented, we don't understand why this is being pushed in what appears in our end to be an expedited process when there is no eminent use of eminent domain today. We would request that a postponement be, or a continuance be allowed to allow us to analyze not only the ordinance before you today, but also Mr. Miller stated there's 2 inches of supporting material on that, and we'd like the chance to review that information as well in order to understand the concerns and the considerations that this ordinance proposes. The Housing and Building Association supports private property rights. We aren't taking a position for or against this. We're asking for time to review it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Good afternoon, David Neville, Chair of the Urban Renewal Authority. I'd like to start by offering up that the Castle Coalition, Councilman Miller's consultant on this project, has given Colorado a passing grade on its state report card with regard to the use of eminent domain. There has been a lot of misinformation in the last 20 minutes or so spread in this room. I can answer every single question that has come up with regard to what we as an Urban Renewal Authority are engaged in downstairs in the conference room or up here in this room. Just to respond to a couple, it was suggested by Councilman Miller that we were in an executive session in our January meeting. That was not the case. Mrs. Miller suggested that there was a lot of talk in our January meeting about eminent domain. What she failed to mention was that all the talk was about how we are not going to use it. And so that said, I think there's a lot of half-truth, a lot of no truth, a lot of panic and fear being spread right now. And as the last speaker said, we don't need to adopt this in a rushed fashion. I could offer up for you several examples of stringent restrictions that already exist under state law against the use of eminent domain. One that has not been mentioned is 3125-105.5. This statute restricts the transfer of private property to private developers. We've heard Councilman Miller talk about how that's an important provision in his ordinance. That's already restricted under state law. I believe it's extraordinarily important that you familiarize yourself with that law, because what I'm hearing today among this room is not so much just about eminent domain, but it's about urban renewal in general. There are a lot of comments in this room that strictly, I think, would, if you voted in this fashion, would take urban redevelopment off the table. We would not have a function as an urban renewal authority. So I urge you to familiarize yourself with 105.5. Secondly, with regard to the letters that have been sent, that Councilman Miller mentioned, it's clear in the urban renewal plans and in these letters that the ultimate authority rests with the City Council. The Urban Renewal Authority of Colorado Springs is not running amok, threatening property owners in this town. There have been no examples cited of eminent domain used in this town. Some mentions of eminent domain in Denver, Fort Collins. The citizens of Colorado Springs are not in danger from the Urban Renewal Authority. With regard to Mr. Knowles, I would love the opportunity to address that in a more fulsome fashion. I think it does deserve a fair hearing, and there are some letters and correspondence that should be aired openly. And we as an Urban Renewal Authority should own what happened. And I have been in touch with Mr. Knowles personally. He knows he's under no threat from us. I have assured him that personally. I'm not here to defend the Kelo case or the use of eminent domain. Mr. Knowles, in fact, heard me suggest, well, I said quite bluntly, that in my view, the Kelo case was a travesty. Mr. Murray is my witness.
Okay, please wrap up.
In closing, I'd like to suggest that this ordinance be granted a more fulsome hearing.
Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. President Pro Tem, and members of council, Doug Stemple. I'm CEO of Classic Homes and also one of the principals. My presentation won't be as fluid and probably as eloquent as a lot of the orchestrated presentation that was in front of you today, as I only learned about this early this afternoon and juggled my schedule to try and get here. So it is a bit difficult. I don't understand the urgency. There is no one who supports private property rights in this town more than I. But I would also tell you that Euclidean zoning, which our industry supports and which is used every day, is also an invasion of private property rights, but it is done under a strict set of guidelines that actually have a whole lot more ambiguity than anything under the urban renewal or under the eminent domain. So this isn't really just a private property rights issue. It has to be something more. I don't understand the urgency. There's nothing that's in front of us. We are going against a long-standing policy of investing stakeholders in a process. I support making it very difficult to ever use condemnation if a private or a private-public partnership's involved. It needs to be difficult. It can't be easy. But you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is something which is a fundamental shift in public policy, and we've been completely deprived of being at the table. I don't understand it. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've served as the SCIP bond chairman. I've served as the head of finance for the Sustainable Funding Committee. Every time I've been involved in a public process, frankly, it's excruciatingly long. And now we're going to run this through, and we haven't had any opportunity to weigh in. All we're asking for is an opportunity to weigh in, and we would respectfully request that you continue it. Furthermore, I personally think this is bad public policy. As I've gotten older, some of you may or may not know, my background is that I was a practicing attorney, and I haven't practiced in 20 years. Frankly, I wasn't that good at it, and I'm still recovering. But I understand these issues, and this is not simple. But as I've gotten older, and hopefully, maybe a little wiser or a little more mature, I've realized that it's really, really important in my life not to use 3 words: only, always, and never. This proposed resolution is an embodiment of all 3 of those principles. The only time you can use eminent domain is for a public purpose. You can never use it if the private sector is involved. And that's not good policy. Leave yourself or future council some wiggle room. I went up to opening day of the Rockies on Friday. There's 100,000 people in Lodo. There's an amazing environment. You'd be hard-pressed to convince those people that urban renewal, eminent domain is a bad thing. I'm not suggesting that's what this is about, but I am saying there are good things that come about through these. Don't just make a broad, overarching, throw it all away. Let us be involved in the process. Let us see if we can come back and help to achieve the goals that everyone has. And I would respectfully request that you continue it, and if not continue it, please defeat it.
Okay. Somebody else? Welcome.
Afternoon, members of council. Jim Reese, Executive Director of Colorado Springs Urban Renewal. I would like to echo both David and Doug just mentioned. I think we need more time to vet this process. I think you deserve a lot more explanation of some of the things that were spoken about today, some of the issues that were brought up as far as how eminent domain has been applied or the threat thereof. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things here today, because I think they've been misconstrued. Typically, and it's true of all of our urban renewal plans, that there is a clause in the urban renewal plan itself that says before the use of eminent domain can be allowed, it has to come to this body. And you approve that actually when the actual urban renewal plan comes here. So when the Urban Renewal Authority brings a plan for approval, this body has the ability to say whether or not you're actually going to include the use of eminent domain in the plan itself. You don't have to do that. So that's one safeguard right there. David mentioned the state statute, that's another safeguard. And the whole process itself requires the authority, after negotiation with the property owner, to come back to this body before you can actually use eminent domain itself. So there's a lot of safeguards already built into the process. I think this is redundant and actually totally unnecessary. But again, I'd like to have a longer session where we can explain a lot of the situations that have been brought forward today in a more question and answer type setting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else who wants to come forward? Okay. We're done with public testimony then? Okay, so we have a ordinance before us. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Marcia Fields. I'm not really prepared to speak on this today, but what I've been hearing is that some of these people, we're just talking, they can't understand what is the problem and what are the concerns about this blight and this possibility of eminent domain. I can tell you what is the major concern and what's driving a lot of the opposition to eminent domain, and it's trust, or the lack of trust in what organizations like the Urban Renewal Authority or the city councils, what government might possibly do to them. And I'm talking about the little people, the people who can't afford to go into court and get lawyers and fight something like these studies, these condition studies and these eminent domain studies. It's fear. It's fear from the little people, and again, it is a lack of trust that what is theirs can be taken away no matter what they do. So for those who say they don't understand why there's this opposition, it is a lack of trust and confidence in their governing bodies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wants to come and testify? Okay, I think we've finished the public testimony. Councilmember Martin?
President King, I think we have a motion on the floor for this ordinance, and before we move forward, I just don't want things to move too quickly here. There's several people here that I would like to hear from if we're going to move forward with this, rather than consider a postponement for a full public hearing.
Okay.
And so if we want to go through all these people without considering a postponement, could I ask the attorney, if I was to move to postpone this, do we still have to vote on the actual ordinance first?
There is a hierarchy of intervening motions, and I have given my copy of the rules to Mr. Bennett so that he and Mr. King may have that for reference here.
So my question is, can I?
Yes, you can.
Can I make a motion to postpone?
There's a whole list of intervening motions, and a motion to postpone this to a definite date would be one of those motions.
Okay.
And that would be considered an intervening motion over the main motion that's currently on the floor.
So if I understand right, I can make a motion now.
Correct.
That would postpone this item. I think 2 weeks is enough if we have a full public hearing when it comes back. I think there's a lot of people left to be heard on this topic.
Okay.
The date would be April 22nd or the May 13th.
I actually would prefer May 13th, just to give more stakeholder process time.
So do you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that this item be postponed to May 13th.
Okay, there's a motion to move it to May 13th. Is there a second?
Oops, sorry, Val. You wanted.
Yes. I'm sorry. Did I miss?
Undo that.
Wait, let's get it. Okay, Councilmember Martin has moved it. Councilmember Snyder has seconded it.
Yes.
And the motion is to move this to May 13th for a regular, that's a regular session, not a work session, right? That's a regular session?
Yes, that's
Okay.
Tuesday, the 13th.
Okay, Tuesday, the 13th, okay? Councilmember Miller.
And what happens to the main motion?
The main motion would be superseded by this motion. So the main motion, I think, would still be in place when we come back. Is that correct?
We'll have to confer with the rules, but this is an intervening motion, so we could either entertain a new motion to consider the ordinance after a more thorough consideration this on the 13th, or you could reconsider that motion.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion to bring this issue back on May 13th. Is there any more discussion? Let's vote. Wait, I'm sorry. Are we?
Yeah.
We need a minute or two? Oh, Councilman, I'm sorry, Councilmember Pico. I'm sorry.
Yeah, speaking on a motion. I earlier expressed a desire to delay because I had a number of questions that I had on some of the mechanics that we had built into the ordinance. I've had most of those questions answered, and I'm ready to move forward and go ahead and take a vote today rather than delay, and certainly not for a whole month.
Okay. All right, any further discussion on the motion? Councilmember Knight.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the validity of this intervening motion. I know when I was sitting in the back of the room going through, as a candidate watching, I saw where President Hente at that time said a motion to delay takes precedence. I made such a motion shortly after we seated sometime. I don't remember the topic or the subject, but I know that I was told we could not do that, that there was already a motion on the floor, and that motion had to be addressed before we could entertain a motion to delay. I went back and talked to President Hinte. I said, hey, what gives? And he says, no, he didn't remember doing any delays either. So, you know, when I tried such a tactic, probably not the right word, but I can't think of a better word right now. When I tried such a tactic before, I was told that we could not do that. So I have concerns about the validity of our doing that according to the rules.
Okay, according to Rule 317, parliamentary procedure for motions, when an item is before council, no motion shall be entertained except as listed in the priority highest to lowest. The highest priority is a motion to adjourn. The second highest is to postpone temporarily to a specific date. So I think in reading the way I understand the rules of the council, is this motion does supersede the current motion because it's the only motion that would precede it is a motion to adjourn.
That's correct, President King. I mean, that's a direct statement out of the rules. This is an intervening motion, and according to the council's rules, and Mr. Knight, I can't answer what happened to you before, but this is a correct application of the rule.
Before we take a vote on that motion, I'd like, Peter, could you come and I have a question for you on enforcement, housing maintenance and building code violations. Can you help me with that? If you have a building, if you have a
Yes.
housing or a maintenance or a building code violation, who is it the proper authority to cite that?
So, for the record, Peter Wysocki, Planning and Development Director. Two ways. One way is there is a determination of a dangerous and unsafe building that can be determined by the building official, which of course would be the director of the regional building department. Of course, I think you are aware that regional building department reports to a 3-member board, a city, the county, and a seat that rotates among the suburbs. The second method is through our code enforcement office and the police department. The city does have an adopted dilapidated building ordinance, and there's a number of criteria and procedures, so on and so forth, that are set forth in city code, how code enforcement contacts the property owners, what type of abatement is required, et cetera, and it goes into the details on how the city has the ability to abate. That section of the code, correct me if I'm wrong, Wynetta, does not address anything about eminent domain or anything like that. It is basically procedural section of the code on how we contact and seek abatement of dilapidated buildings.
Okay, in the specific ordinance on page 3, it talks about blighted property, and it says inspected by the regional building department. So they do have that authority to inspect that for safety and then also for violations of building code?
That is correct. We, as participants of the regional building department, defer that authority to the regional building department. It's my understanding is that then they actually contact our code enforcement office, and that we can issue the letters that the building official has determined the building to be unsafe.
And then for abandoned property, who has the authority to determine whether a property has been abandoned or not?
That, I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay.
To look it up.
It would seem under the ordinance that it's the regional building department, but it's not specific to that issue on page 4, so I don't know if it's in chapter 6. I was just curious who,
Just give me a minute and I'll
okay.
I'll get the site for you.
The abandoned property has a meaning in the ordinance, but it doesn't say who determines that as far as I can tell, whether it would be the city zoning inspectors or the regional building department. So maybe we could find that out. I think that would be important to clear up, so I don't know how that is done, so. Okay, thank you. All right, so
Do you need that to vote on?
question.
Do you want, Councilmember Miller?
I have a question for Councilmember Bennett. Did you ask for the parliamentary procedures in which to delay this, or was that just presented from the city attorney?
No, I was asked by the chair to ask the city attorney what the procedures were.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure if we had a motion come forward for that, that it would be clear what precedent would be available and how the motions would work, so I wanted to make sure we were following the rules. Councilmember Miller.
I see where this is going to a delay, and you know, that's if that's what the rules allow. My question is, the largest objections are to people who disagree with the need for even having it. So to say we're going to have a public process and really work together on bringing something else forward, I think is really not what's going to happen. So if it's going to get voted down, let's vote it down. And having a whole lot of discussion and banter back and forth when really there's no support for it, I'd rather just strike it down right now. If there's not support for the ordinance, let's be done with it, because a lot of the objections were from people who in their first statement said, this is unnecessary, we don't need this. So if that's the case, let's just vote it down now, and we'll save everybody a whole lot of time.
I would much rather try and see if we have any issues that could be solved and try to move it forward if it has a majority of council as opposed to just voting it down. That would be my case. Dave, did you find anything?
President King, in response to your question, there's several relevant code sections, but in 6.12.606, it talks about dilapidated buildings, and it's actually the city council who makes a finding there in a determination regarding dilapidated buildings that have a negative impact. Farther up in that chapter, it talks about addressing dwelling places, and that is, as Mr. Wysocki has represented to you, there's a procedure there to determine if there's a problem with a dwelling and how it needs to be abated.
So from your perspective, it would be council who would determine whether a property has been abandoned?
Under 6.12.606, it says findings. The city council finds and determines that the existence of dilapidated buildings and properties within the city present significant hazards to the health, safety, and welfare of citizens of the city. So that's a general finding of the city, actually, and that is embedded in the code here itself. And actually, as I'm reading farther down, this is an administrative process, so the city council actually that's a legislative finding. What happens is when we've got a dilapidated building, again, it's the administrator who makes these findings, and so this is something that's an administrative process typically that is done. There is an appeal process to a municipal court for this, and so there's already a procedure to determine if properties are dilapidated or if we've got dwellings that are in need of repair under the code.
Would this take precedent, this new ordinance, would it take precedent over that ordinance?
That is one of the many questions that we do not have an opinion for on you today.
Okay. Okay, any further questions? Brent?
May I comment, President?
Sure.
Just to reiterate, I know that on behalf of the mayor, I spoke yesterday, but just on his behalf, he's opposed to the ordinance as written. There was a question by Councilmember Pico yesterday about the statement made about traditional municipal purposes. That was mentioned. These include acquiring land for municipal buildings, airport and transit facilities, and stormwater detention. I think that's just one example of many. We haven't got a clear legal review and the full ramifications of this ordinance, but I'd like the city attorney just to step in. That's the question I think that was brought up yesterday on that particular issue. If they could.
Could I just say right now, the motion on the floor is to postpone?
Okay.
And if we could maybe
Okay.
get through that and then
Okay.
come back and see if we need to come back to.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we did everything. Is there any more comments before we vote? Councilmember Miller, do you want to still speak now? Okay. Can we open the machine? That motion passes on a 5-4 vote. The issue will come back for us on May 13th. It is 5:47. We will take a 45-minute dinner break.